Welcome to 100 Plus, a podcast focused on the most important people, events, and ideas of the last 2,000 years in Christian faith. Today, we continue our slide into the Middle Ages with a look at monasticism in general and St. Benedict in particular. Not that long ago, monks were viewed as odd and quirky. Today, they are often celebrated for their wines and cheeses and their monasteries, which have become the place to go to detox from this crazy world. Neither view is particularly accurate, so in this episode, Mike will be exploring the origins of monasticism as well as tracing its development, paying particular attention to the father of monasticism himself, St. Benedict.
Around 250 AD, during the Decian persecution, a guy walks out into the desert, a man by the name of Paul of Thebes, and he heads out there to live a life of solitude and a life of devotion, seeking after God. So more than a few stories are going to be told about him, such as the claim that he's going to live out in the desert for the next 100 years in a cave, and that towards the end of his life he's going to meet up with St. Anthony, who's an important figure in the monastic movement, and that they're going to have sort of a miraculous little gathering and then have food sort of delivered by God. There's debate as to whether or not Paul of Thebes even existed ever. We know that Anthony did. In fact, he's basically understood to be sort of the first true monastic, which is both an act of personal devotion and sort of sanctification. It's in which we sign up to take extraordinary actions to do everything we can to be closer to God. We're going to do certain things. We're going to not do certain things, just as an act of personal agency to try and become more like Christ. And monasticism is also a reform movement of society, but more principally, it tends to be a reform movement of the church. So today in episode 16, we are sliding into the Middle Ages and looking at the origin of monasticism generally and highlighting the person and work of St. Benedict in particular. So in the previous last couple podcasts, we've been in the Middle Ages. Most recently, we were looking at St. Patrick, who's this Irish saint who chased all the snakes out of Ireland. And I said, yeah, that's sort of not the case. Just like the Holy Roman Empire was not holy, not Roman, and not an empire, St. Patrick was not a saint, he was not Irish, and there never were any snakes on Ireland for him to chase away. But although those things were not true, I said there were a lot of things about Patrick that actually were true and that he could teach us a lot. The life that he lived, the way he loved those who had persecuted him, there's much there for us. And then the week before that, I was looking at the sack of Rome, which is generally understood when the barbarians come over the gates. That's generally understood to be the end of that Roman era, and we are now officially into the Middle Ages. Some think of it as the Dark Ages, but again, a complicated term. Today, we are looking at monks who factor into the story of the Middle Ages. They actually have been a part of the story from before the Middle Ages, and I mentioned monks in several previous episodes. I talked about him with Athanasius because he looked at monasticism, actually writes a biography of St. Anthony. He's drawn to it. And again, Athanasius is the guy who becomes the Bishop of Alexandria after the death of Alexander. So Athanasius is the guy at the Council of Nicaea as a young study, but then he really is the principal guy at the Council of Constantinople, standing up against the Arians, Athanasius, Contra Mundum, all of that. Looked at monasticism a little bit in the comments about Jerome, the cantankerous scholar who tried monasticism a couple times. Looked at it a little bit with St. Patrick because there's monastic elements there, and obviously how the Irish saved civilization. We talked about that. It's going to be a Benedictine movement. I could have talked about the monks when we looked at Augustine because he's profoundly influenced by the lives of monks. I don't think he takes monastic vows. Maybe he does, but he does become obviously a priest and a bishop of the church. So I've brought up monks before, but I've saved sort of looking at the whole monastic movement until now because it really picks up most of its steam in the West when we come to St. Benedict in the 5th century. Now, monasticism can be a little bit confusing because there's so much there over the course of 1,500 years. So I want to try and keep it clean for you by pointing out the things you've got to keep straight. But before we go there, let me say 2 introductory things. First, monks. So monks make up monasticism. This is mostly, think of this as today, Roman Catholic. Catholic is universal. Roman Catholic is the Western Church. And it's going to split, West and East, officially going to split in the 11th century. And then the Western Church is going to split with the Protestant Reformation. All of that lies ahead of us. But monks today are Roman Catholic, and they are people that take a specific set of vows of devotion to God and sign up for a particular way of life. So as a rule, monks are members of the clergy, but they're not priests. So priests are members of the clergy who are going to interface with the laity. They're going to perform Mass. They are going to hear confession. Monks are going to live sort of isolated from the world. They're going to live lives of contemplation and self-denial. So by saying they're isolated doesn't mean that they can only focus on themselves. That would be very contrary to what Jesus calls us to, which is to care for others. And so they're not going to live only for themselves, but they're going to live in isolation and seek to serve others through prayer and other kinds of work. And so I will note that this is different for all kinds of different monastic orders. But let me just say before I forget that the idea that monks would be devoting a lot of their time to prayer seems expected. Prayer seems to be very spiritual and monk-like. Work might not seem particularly spiritual. I would argue that it is supposed to be. Our vocation is very much things that we do unto God. But what's important to understand about the elevation of work in the lives of the monks is that at the time that monasticism is getting started, and especially as it's growing through the late Middle Ages, gentlemen were to live lives of leisure and dignity. They were to read and think and reflect and contemplate. They were not to be busy with their hands. They were not to be farming. They were not to be involved in making food and baking and running making wine. They weren't to be involved in any of that kind of stuff. And so there's an act of humiliation that is sort of inherent in this selflessness. I'm going to pray for others, and I am also going to serve. I'm going to do very pedestrian kinds of things. So if you want to become a monk, therefore you sign, and monks, there are women sort of around the fringes doing monastic kinds of things, but obviously we would think of them as being separated from the men, and think of them today as nuns taking a different sort of set of vows. But if you wanted to be a monk, you showed up around a monastery and you asked to be let in, and you had to learn some things right away, the Lord's Prayer, and memorize a bunch of Psalms. If you still want in, then you would enter into a period of 3 years of being a novice before you would take final vows and say, yes, this is the life I'm going to live. Now, being a monk was not always a lifetime commitment as it is today. That's the expectation. And throughout history, monks were not always celibate, but for the most part, that has always been the case. So the second introductory kind of thing to note here when we think about monasticism is that the early monks are not going to be coming right after the early church. So you have to understand that monks are often people that are making these acts of devotion, and they're looking to suffer. Now, some of this makes me uncomfortable because I think that asceticism is problematic, and the church has a problem with asceticism, I think. I think it's got a little bit too much Greek philosophy in it, and it's not exactly what we get called to. But there's a lot of people that are taking these vows of monasticism in order to suffer, to sort of purge sin, or to suffer to just become more holy, or to become more like Christ, or to identify with Christ. So early on, you didn't have to work hard to suffer for Christ, because before Constantine, you could get beat up, you could get fed to the lions, you could get, you could run sideways with all kinds of official Romans and Jewish leaders and other things and get in trouble. So it's not until Constantine comes along that you have the monastic thrust, where people are saying, once Constantine issues his Edict of Milan, and it's now not illegal to be a Christian, and then at some point it seems to be fashionable to be a Christian, because after all, the emperor is a Christian. A lot of people are complaining. A lot of the earlier Christians are complaining that, it used to be you got baptized with fear of death, and now, it seems to be like a picnic. And there's no fear here, and this is not a pure church, and people are not as serious about their commitment to Christ as I think they should be. And so they would look to do something else. They'd take this to another level. So this doesn't happen until after Constantine, but they will say that they see the model for this in the Bible. So in the Old Testament, you have Samson taking vows of, he's not going to cut his hair, and he's not going to drink wine. And then you have Elisha living out, in the desert. And then in the New Testament, you've got, of course, John the Baptist. He's a hero of the monks. He's going to go out into the desert and sort of live this difficult life and spend time with God and in prayer. And Jesus, of course, will then call on people to sell all that you have and give it to the poor. And Jesus will fast, and Jesus will go out himself, will go out into the desert and wrestle the temptation of Christ. And then you got Paul coming along saying things in 1 Corinthians like, I buffet my body and I make it my slave, lest after I have preached to others, I myself might lose my way. So you have monasticism coming out, for the most part, starting to pick up a little bit of speed after Constantine and even a little bit later. So that's why, although it's got early roots and people would say it goes back to the earliest church, I have put it off until now, when we are in the 5th century. So having said all that, my setup, let me say that there's a few divisions you have to keep straight to sort of keep, to know the players, you got to look at the program. So there's a monastic movement in the East and in the West. So Constantinople and Rome. And we're focused today mostly on Rome. So it's going to be Benedict, not Basil the Great. He's more on the East. And the East actually does more, perhaps, with the monks. It more sort of starts there a little bit earlier. And because the monastic movement is a reform movement in the church, and because the West, the church, the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, will have a big reformation, a reform movement in the church, the Protestant Reformation. Monasticism is not as big today in the West as it is in the East. So just know that you hear things, and it's different because we're looking in the East and the West. A second thing to note is that monasticism takes different forms, and one of the big divisions is the monastic movement that comes for those who want to be hermits, going to live alone, versus those that are going to live in community with other monks. So the hermits, and by the way, the word monk comes from the Greek word monos, only. So the hermits are those that are going to live lives of isolation, and they're going to live often in the desert or in a cave on the edge of the desert. so that they could withdraw. In Latin, the word desert, by the way, means hermit, it's hermit. So the hermits are those that are living out in the desert. They're living alone. Egypt, by the way, is an ideal place to be a monk, at least was before the Arab Spring and the problems in Egypt today, and even more before they dammed the Nile. It used to be that the Nile would flood every year, and it would bring all this rich soil into the Nile Valley, and so about a mile on either side of the Nile was this rich soil, and you could grow just about anything, and so there's plenty of food. And then right next to that, you've got the desert. So you could live in the desert, you could come in just a little bit, there's lots of food to eat. So people were often Egyptian if they were going to be monks. And by the way, please understand, when we think of the desert, like I'm going to be a monk, I'm going to go live in the desert, don't think like some nice, 5-star spa in Albuquerque where you're going to go be in this really nice place and you're going to have herbal teas and do yoga and stretches and sit by a pool or something like that. In the church, in the early church, the desert is understood as being a place of it's the wilderness, and the desert fathers who give us the 7 deadly sins, right? They'll go out into the desert in order to escape distractions and to deal with their own issues. So there's a sense in which you're not fleeing to the desert. You're sort of going to do battle in the desert. And it's supernatural battle. You're going to have to wrestle your own sin, and it comes from within. And so you're going to discover that when all the distractions go away and there's nobody around, you can't get mad at your neighbor. You can't accuse someone else of being an idiot and causing you problems. You can't blame the things that are going wrong on somebody else or something else. And you are free from the distraction, so you recognize sort of the poverty of your own soul. And then it's also a place of sort of spiritual battle, again, looking at Jesus in the temptation. So the hermits were those who did this. And St. Anthony, again, he's the guy that is credited as being the first, sort of the founder. He grows up in Alexandria. He's born in 251, and he comes from a wealthy family. When he's 19, he comes into his money. And shortly thereafter, you hear somebody say that Jesus said that if you really want to follow him, sell all you have, give it to the poor, and then go follow him. And so he does this. And he goes out and he's going to live in the desert for 13 years. And he doesn't eat much. And a lot of what he eats is the people will come out. This is one of the ironies of the monastic hermits, is that they will want to be alone. And because they want to be alone, people will seek them out because they're out there praying, they're out there reflecting, they're studying scripture, they're close to God, they're punishing themselves. And so there's a sense in which they're more spiritual than I am, and I want them to pray for me. And so people would go out and seek their advice or ask for their prayers, and they would bring them food. And so he's going to live out there for 13 years, and I put a picture of Anthony painted by Michelangelo in the email, appropriately called, right, the torment of St. Anthony. He's going to say that it's a battle. He's got temptations left and right. He's got wild animals coming after him. He's got women trying to seduce him. He's getting a wrestling match, with the devil, getting beat up. And so he's going to be out there for a while, and then he'll come in and he'll help other people who want to sort of embrace this life. And then he will go out and do it again. He'll go to a sort of a retired fort, an abandoned fort. So this is still when the Roman Empire is going, but it's in decline. And he finds some outposts, no longer manned. It's not nice. He lives there. And again, being a monk is early on it's an act of asceticism, of sacrifice. Anthony's going to eat one meal a day. He's going to sleep on the ground. He's going to sort of punish himself in an effort to try and rise to a higher level of spirituality. So monks are referred to in early writings as warriors, Christian warriors, and athletes. They are the ones that are in particularly good Christian shape. So alongside the hermits, you have this other group. You have the Cenobite Monastics, which is, by the way, still big in the East. And here, as opposed to being on your own, you are living in community with other people. And you're going to become more holy because you're all committed to becoming more holy, so you're going to help each other. But in particular, you're sort of going the opposite route. As opposed to this life of solitary living and reflection and prayer, you have no solitary life. You are living in community, and it's a very structured, ordered life in which you have almost no private time. And you're not in isolation. You are constantly around other people, and they're going to aggravate you, and you're going to have to learn how to become holy in their presence. And they're actually helping you to become holy. They're teaching you patience. If you read the writings of some of these people, you'll hear them say things like, if I were to live by myself in isolation, whose feet would I wash? If I'm all alone, because again, it's a path of humiliation that you're on. So this movement starts after St. Anthony. St. Pachomus is one who's sort of credited with this. He had been a soldier, and on one campaign, when he's in trouble, he is cared for by Christians who he's very impressed that they are caring for all those that are needy and the sick. So there's a lot of medical care that's being provided and food. And so when he gets out, when his service to the military is done, he goes and he looks these Christians up, and he wants to live among them and becomes a Christian. And in 314, he's baptized. And initially, he models his life after St. Anthony, and he's a hermit. But he hears God calling him to actually use his sort of military organizational skills and to create a place for lots of people to be monks together. And so he forms this Tabina monastery, and he'll soon have about 100 monks that will come alongside him. And he becomes the abbot from the word Abba, father in Aramaic. So he's the father, and he will issue very strict rules. So you're signing up to be a monk. You are sort of signing away your rights, and you are going to become purified in part by dying to self, by living under the order and the rule of the abbot. And he will write a book that will become a model for other books that are written, in particular St. Benedict. But he's going to write a book called Ascetica. So asceticism is, punishing yourself. And so it's about how to run a monastery, and very important. So first division you got to keep clear when we talk about monks and monasticism. We've got a movement in the East, we've got a movement in the West. Secondly, we've got movements that focus on individuals, and then we got movements that focus on groups. By the way, you've got some left turns here. And one of the things I should mention in the event that you want to read more is some of the hermits are they're a little bit, to say odd and quirky would be kind. So you got this one guy, for instance, named Simon the Stylite. So you got this whole group of hermits that decide that they're really into asceticism. So they're going to go, they're going to build a tower. They're going to build a tower. They're going to go live on the top of this tower. It's like 6 feet tall. They're just going to restrict themselves. They're going to be out in the elements, the sun, the rain. They're going to depend on other people to bring them food. And if they don't, they go hungry. And Simon is one of the most famous. He lives on this platform for 35 years. I have not embraced that life. And as I read the Gospels, I don't see that being what Jesus has called us to. But a lot of people would come out and they would seek these people out because they're so much more holy than I am. They're buffeting their body. They're spending all their time in prayer and fasting. So you've got these divisions, East and West. You've got individuals, the hermits, and the communities. Additionally, you have different orders. So you have the Benedictine monks, you have the Cistercians, you have the Franciscans, right? There's all these different orders, and they have a slightly different focus and slightly different rules. So as I have said a couple times, we're focusing on the West, and so St. Benedict is the guy who's particularly important here. And St. Benedict is great because he brings really top-flight organizational skills to this issue. And so he's born in Italy in 480. He studies in Rome. He's got a twin sister, Scholastica. He goes off to Rome. He's there for a while. It's a little bit too raucous for him. So he leaves, and he wants to become a monk. And so he hangs out with some monastic orders, and it doesn't work out well. He's apparently very zealous, and they don't particularly like him. Sort of hard when you're too zealous for the monks. But he will eventually make his way to Monte Cassino and start over. And there he becomes famous. And most of what we learn about St. Benedict, we learn from Gregory the Great. And in his writings about Benedict, he makes much of the fact that Benedict will choose this life of self-denial, not so that he could escape the world, but so that he could save it, so that he could help the world. And as a general observation, when Christians look at the world, look at society, look at culture, they respond in one of a handful of ways. Some acclimate. They just go along to get along, right? They just embrace whatever the world is putting out there. Some flee. They say the world is so dark, it's so evil, it's so wicked, it's so whatever. I can't be around it, and I'm going to withdraw so I don't get sullied. I would argue against both of those and say that's not what we're to do. So we are to be salt and light. We're to be a reforming agent somehow. We're to be people that are going to share the gospel. We're to be people that are going to model the kingdom values. And so there's some of this reforming agents are seen for those who live inside. And I often point to, a William Wilberforce as somebody that sort of seems to do this particularly well. This is what Chuck Colson would also argue for, and prison fellowship and all of that. But you have others that say, no, I'm going to withdraw from society, but I'm going to withdraw from society to help reform it. And that's what we're going to end up with the Benedictines. And this is a little bit of what I was mentioning last episode when we were talking about how the Irish saved civilization, Thomas Cahill's book, and the Benedictine monasteries that are going to flourish. They're going to multiply. There's going to be thousands of these monasteries that have this Benedictine order to them, and they're all sort of following what Benedict sets up. And then as Rome collapses, then it was again the Irish that were sending a lot of Irish monasteries that were sending a lot of missionaries into Europe, and they also were these pockets of health and learning and grace and food and all of that stuff. So Benedict really launches this movement, and he makes two big contributions to this. The first one is his book called The Rule of St. Benedict. It's got 73 chapters still in print. The first 6 or 7 chapters are just philosophy, or they're the only ones that are sort of what you would expect about the religious life and philosophy and what it means to be a disciple of Christ. The rest of the book is about how to live in a monastery, how to run a monastery, what to do about food and sleeping arrangements and all these other things. And it's quite flexible, and so it works in a variety of different countries and cultures. And so lots of people are going to take the Rule of St. Benedict and apply it to their life. Even today, people will talk about reading it devotionally. A second thing that Benedict is known for is promoting the praying of the canonical hours, or the divine or daily office. And this makes up the order of the lives of the monks. So it's very regulated. So you have these 7 periods of prayer or singing. And so every 3 hours you're getting together to pray. So it starts at 2 a.m. with matins, and so it's the monks would gather together for 20 minutes to pray or to sing. Again, depends on the order, it depends upon the abbot. Sometimes it's more prayer, sometimes it's more singing, sometimes it's more work, sometimes it's more of this. But oftentimes in a monastery, you will sing through the Psalms, 150 Psalms. You'll sing through the Psalms once a week. So you've got the prayer time at 2 in the morning, and then you've got another one at first light, so whatever that is. And then you've got mid-morning prime, you gather together again to pray and to sing. You've got 4 other times that are going to happen during the course of the day. And so the Benedictine orders are going to all follow the divine office. And there's a lot of freedom outside of that, but they're going to follow these rules. So lots of Benedictine monasteries up through about the 1200s. One of the problems that the monasteries have is that they become wealthy. So you can imagine you're going to bring 30 or 100 or more men together to live very simply, lives of great discipline, great frugality. And so they are going to, over time, acquire wealth, especially because not only are you earning things because you're making cheese or wine or farming and you're selling the extra, or you're all the other disciplines and crafts and things that monks would take on. Also, at various times, certain monasteries become very prestigious. And so in order to get in, you sort of had to buy your way in, sort of like I hate to say it like a country club, but you had to buy your way in. And so you would generally bring something like a farm. I'm donating the farm to the monastery, or I'm bringing this much money, or I'm bringing whatever. And so over, a couple hundred years, these monasteries become very wealthy. And so the problem is they become corrupt. People join not because they want to live this life of ascetic frugality and devotion and humility to God. They sign up because they go, wow, they get great accommodations, great food. And the monks are not, these people. I mean, Anthony, the hermit, he's out there sleeping in the wild. He's eating 1 meal a day. He's wearing the most uncomfortable clothing he can find. And now you got people that are, saying, hey, let's upgrade the dorms and make them even nicer, and more food. And so the monks can become, fat and happy and lazy. And so you have ongoing reform movements within the monastic communities. And so, and by the way, when Protestants think of monks, often we think of this period in the late Middle Ages, where the monastic movement is pretty corrupt. And so we think of the time of Martin Luther, and there's just there's a need for reform. And as we'll look, the Catholic Church will reform after the Protestant Reformation as well. But what happens is that you have the Benedictine order that really takes off and gets big, and it's going to last a long time, but it's going to grow corrupt. And so in the 10th century, the Cluniac movement is going to start out of Cluny in France, and it's going to start to counteract the corruption and to try and get back to a pure way of life. And so it's really going to be focused on the freedom of all secular influence, princes and patrons and people that are trying to buy their way in and all of that. And you're going to have not political appointments of bishops, but you're going to have the election of the monks are going to choose their abbot, and when that abbot dies, they're going to elect the next abbot. And the Cluniac is really going to be sort of fanatical about clerical celibacy. Then a couple hundred years later, as that grows a little bit lax, you're going to have the Cistercian order, and it's founded in Burgundy by monks who just want to go back to the Benedictine order and get back to this simple sort of, life of humility and prayer and service. And it's going to grow large. And then I could go on. You're going to have the mendicant orders, the Franciscans and the Dominicans. And their mendicant means they're going to be beggars. They're not going to be able to own anything. So the Franciscans coming after St. Francis of Assisi, right? I'm not going to have, anything. I'm not going to have two coats or anything like that. So you keep having these reform movements that are going to go through the church. So one of the reasons it can be confusing when you're trying to make sense of what's going on with the monastic movement is you got East-West, you got hermits, and you got people living in community. You got all kinds of different orders, the Benedictines, the Franciscans, the Cistercians. You've got them at different stages of purity and reform. I could go on, even within the Benedictine order, you're going to have an abbot that is going to choose more work and less prayer, or you're going to have an abbot that is going to focus the monastery on copying the Bible, or you're going to focus on certain acts of charity or setting up hospitals. The monks were often the most educated people, so they were providing that kind of care. So there can be very different feels in different monasteries. So, and then of course it just goes without saying that, as I've noted, people become monks for very different reasons. And again, it's men. There were some women that were living as hermits, but that's going to become, again, nuns, not monks. So some men become monks out of a desire to devote themselves fully to seeking God. They just want to spend their life in prayer and fasting. Some of these are doing this for right reasons, and I would say a right reason to devote your life to prayer and fasting is in thanks to God, not trying to earn God's favor, right? So Christianity is not this I do, it's this he did. It's not faith plus works equals salvation. It's faith equals salvation plus works. So the works are there, but they're not so that we could earn. So you've got people in different stages. Martin Luther, when he joins, he's joining to try and save his soul. And he doesn't ever have that sense of being justified by the work of Christ. Some become monks out of a desire to devote themselves to God. Some to atone for their sins. So I'm reading a novel, I mentioned it last time, in which one of the monks had been a knight and kills a lot of people as a knight and feels the need to get right with God. And so he becomes a monk to sort of atone for his sin. Again, I'm not recommending that. Some monks become monks to help reform society. They want to reform the church. They want to help pull Europe out of the Dark Ages. So lots of different reasons. So monasticism, as any movement that's lasted 1,500 years, has got just about anything you want to say about it is probably true. So a couple other final notes here. It's worth noting again that the monasteries really take off as Rome is declining. So as Rome comes under siege by the north, the structure of life is starting to collapse. Rome had been everything. It had been law. It had been order. It had been all the things. It had been trade. It had set up everything. And as Rome collapses, monasteries in particular, but the church in general is going to have to step in. There's not nation states in place, right? So now you've lost Rome, you've lost the empire, and so now you've got all these tribes, and any kind of coordinated effort is going to come from the church, and that's why the Middle Ages is also referred to sometimes as Christendom. The last thing I'll note is, just end with this observation, there is this paradox about monasticism that's worth noting. So the monks try and escape the world, and the world follows them. And so, today, again, being monasteries are sort of chic, it is sort of the Albuquerque retreat experience. You're going to go there because they've got good wine and it's a place to detox and to unwind. So it's got that chicness to it. But I'm noticing something else. I'm noticing something a little bit more profound. The monks try and get away so they can devote themselves to God. And as they do that, other people seek them out. And I think there is an opportunity for people go to the monks, pray for me, right? This is one of the reasons, again, that monasteries became rich is because wealthy people would try and buy monks praying for them so they could get their soul into heaven. Obviously, so rife with corruption at that point. But personal holiness is attractive. Like it ought to be. Personal holiness is attractive. It doesn't look like legalism. It doesn't look like meanness. It looks like a life of joy, a life of peace. And there is opportunity here in this crazy world for you and me to grow closer to Christ, to be people of greater prayer, greater depth, greater intimacy with God. That is a gift to other people. That is attractive to them as well. So may we learn from the monks. I'm not sure what's up next, but we'll visit again next week.